Good evening. Thanks for joining us tonight. I'm Don Nelson. Our big story, radical proposals to possibly save Idaho's protected salmon. During an average year, the number of spring Chinook salmon returning to Idaho by May 7th is more than 7,000. But this year, that number is less than 200. The low numbers have many alarmed, including an Idaho congressman who is asking, what if we remove dams to restore salmon? Steve Liebenthal has our continuing coverage in tonight's Idaho Backroads.
Idaho salmon are born in cool mountain water where they live for a year before beginning a 600 to 900 mile journey through 8 dams to the Pacific Ocean. After 2 to 4 years, they swim back upstream to the very water where they were born to spawn and die. It's a natural cycle that some call miraculous.
It's one of God's cycles, and we probably should not play with it.
That was the voice of Idaho Congressman Mike Simpson, one of many in the region alarmed by the small number of salmon making it back.
Well, the fisheries are down, the spawning counts are down, the return to the hatcheries are down. We haven't seen runs this dismal probably for 25, 30 years.
Fisheries biologist Jim Martin has watched salmon numbers decline during his 50-year career, and now in his retirement, he says the primary reason for that decline is the radical change in the river system. In a naturally flowing Snake and Columbia River system during spring, salmon were pushed from Idaho to the Pacific Ocean in a matter of days. But since 8 dams were built, it's now a series of lakes, and that same journey takes weeks. Martin says that extra time in the system is responsible for killing 50 to 80% of Idaho's salmon on the way downstream.
And it's not just hydro mortality in the turbines, it's creating a cold water stream that'll send smolts to sea in 11 days into a series of pools that are full of predators that warm up that send smolts to sea over 2 months.
Martin says the original 4 dams on the Columbia River set salmon back, but construction of 4 dams on the lower Snake River turned the gradual decline into a nosedive.
If you compare the status of the fish before we built the last 4 dams on the Snake to the status now, there's no comparison.
Martin is one of many in the region who say breaching the 4 dams on the lower Snake is the jumpstart Idaho salmon need to recover. Liz Hamilton agrees. The executive director of the Northwest Sport Fishing Industry Association says breaching dams may sound extreme to some, but she says it's working on other rivers in the Columbia Basin.
Several big dams have come out on behalf of salmon. We're almost ready to take out 4 dams in the Klamath. That's scheduled to start within the next year or so. So the climate and the environment around dam removal is not the sky is falling anymore. It's not the catastrophe that people predicted.
That's a nice fish.
Hamilton says breaching the 4 dams on the Snake would help sustain sport fisheries that pump billions of dollars into Northwest economies. And now Congressman Mike Simpson is asking, what if we breach the dams?
Ultimately, I want healthy, sustainable runs of salmon back in Idaho.
You are asking the question, what if we breach the dams? And I think that's what has a lot of these people excited that that's even being discussed as a possibility. Is it a real possibility?
It is.
Idaho water users are sending 487,000 cubic feet of water downstream to help push salmon through the dams. Fish and Game releases millions of salmon smolts, and in an average year, less than 5 out of every 1,000 will make it back. This year, that number will be much smaller, depriving Idaho's river communities of the money anglers would normally spend.
We effectively pay all the cost of those dams and get none of the benefit. Now, why does that make sense to my constituents in the 2nd District?
But Simpson says he'll consider the consequences breaching dams would have on other communities before he'll embrace it. And he says it's not just about restoring salmon, it's also about restoring the Bonneville Power Administration's ability to compete in a rapidly changing energy market. Will BPA's financial crisis drive Idaho salmon to extinction? More on that next Wednesday on Idaho Backroads. Steve Liebenthal, 6 on your side.
States across the country are faced with a major dilemma. How do you fund addiction treatment for everyone who needs it? The state of Utah is making progress thanks to the federal government. 6 on your side's Karen Lair explains in tonight's Finding Hope.
Well, Don, expanding access to addiction treatment in Utah was a major part of Operation Rio Grande, where agencies on the city, county, and state level joined forces to clean up a specific area of Salt Lake City overrun by drug use and illegal activity. But since the start of that project in 2017, they've gotten more than 160 previously homeless drug addicts into long-term addiction treatment programs, many of whom are now living sober lives with housing and employment.
The program is probably the toughest thing I've ever had to go through in my life.
If you're wondering about the importance of expanding access to addiction treatment, look no further than Beverly Martinez.
I used drugs and I drank for 30 plus years. I was in a bad place, made bad choices.
At the time of our interview, Beverly was just 2 days away from completing the first phase of her recovery treatment at Odyssey House in Salt Lake City, living in the treatment center since August of last year.
This program kept me alive.
Now, thanks to Operation Rio Grande, many homeless drug addicts living on the streets of Salt Lake City are getting that chance to change, given the option of entering a strict treatment program to get clean.
We tell people right up front, this is a difficult program. You have to want to get help, and you have to embrace it, and you have to go along with the flow.
Randall Carlisle knows addiction isn't cured overnight. The average length of stay at Odyssey House is 4 to 6 months.
We believe that you didn't become a heroin addict overnight or in 30 days, and that it takes a longer period than 30 days to treat the addiction as well as the underlying mental reasons why you're an addict.
But if these people are homeless, how are they paying for expensive live-in treatment for months on end? That's where the federal government filled the gaps. Utah legislators applied for Targeted Adult Medicaid, or TAM, to fund treatment for a specific adult population struggling with substance abuse.
The majority of the people that came from Operation Rio Grande were covered by TAM.
And you can't complete the program until you have stable employment and housing.
Yes, I have a job. I'm working legally. And I get to go to an apartment where I'll be living. And yes, I get to transition out of treatment into society where I'll be productive.
No doubt the federal funding made it possible, but Salt Lake County Sheriff Rosie Rivera says there's always something more that could be done.
Now that the Medicaid expansion has happened, that we're able to help a little bit more people. If we were to have full expansion, we would be able to help a lot more people.
And for those struggling to take that first step toward treatment, Beverly wants to remind you, life can get better with a little hard work and determination.
Your life is worth living. And if I can change from where I come from to where I am now, yeah, there's not anybody in this world that can't change.
Well, if you're wondering if the program is working, the answer is yes. Carlisle says typical clients that come to Odyssey House see about 62 to 64% success rate, while the population from Operation Rio Grande is seeing success at 74%, proving that change is possible. It just takes time and a lot of money. Reporting live in studio, I'm Karen Lair, 6 on your side. The cost to kill in Idaho. It's a number we've attempted to uncover here at 6 on your side for the last few years regarding death row inmates in the Gem State. On Friday night, 6 on your side's McKenna King told you the story of the longest living death row inmate currently housed in Idaho's maximum security prison. And now she's attempting to find out how much it's costing the state and you to keep him there.
Thomas Creech has been on and off death row in Idaho for nearly 43 years. That's a lot longer than the average death row inmate sits behind bars after getting the highest possible sentence. Our big question is, why has an inmate been sitting on death row that long, and who is in charge of keeping that tab?
When I asked for the death penalty against Tom Creech, I definitely did believe that he should suffer the death penalty.
That's former Ada County Prosecutor Jim Harris, who called for the death penalty against Thomas Eugene Creech in 1982 for the murder of a fellow inmate. That was the second time Creech was sentenced to death row. But today, Jim Harris has got a slightly different perspective.
I don't believe, quite frankly, that Tom Creech, at least based on the murder that he committed in the penitentiary, should be executed. And I don't say that easily.
But he does say that because he believes there are inmates serving lesser sentences for more heinous crimes. And despite a list of other murders Creech has confessed to and some even convicted of, his current death sentence is for the murder of that one inmate. And that's not the only reason Harris thinks Creech and other inmates should no longer be sentenced to death row in Idaho.
It's a waste of time. It's a terrible waste of money that's being expended in these death penalty cases, and they're never going to happen. So the judges ought to just simply bear up and sentence these people to fixed life and leave it at that.
So how much is the cost of representing and prosecuting an inmate on death row in Idaho? That's a question we've attempted to answer for years. We filed dozens of public records and FOIA requests with the Idaho Department of Correction, the state and county treasurers, the state controller's office, Ada County prosecutor's office, Ada County records, the Idaho Supreme Court, the state appellate public defender's office, and the Idaho District Court. Coming up empty-handed, getting responses like, those records are too old, or check with this office, they might have it. So we asked Creech's lawyer with the Federal Defenders of Idaho. Her response was that the Federal Defender Services of Idaho falls under the judiciary branch of the federal government, and as such, they are not subject to the Federal Freedom of Information Act, which is only applicable to the executive branch of government. The only numbers we were able to obtain were those associated with the cost of simply housing an inmate. IDOC didn't keep track of those numbers until fiscal year 2008, but the cost to house any inmate at IDOC since that time is around $350,000. Whether you're on death row or not, that number remains constant. The number that varies by case is the cost of representation and prosecution. In Creech's case, that number has been adding up since the early 80s, and it's costing taxpayers a lot of money. Money we can't track because it's not public record. Former Ada County prosecutor Jim Harris does believe in the death penalty, but he also believes it would save Idahoans a minimum of hundreds of thousands of dollars per case if people were no longer sentenced to death row in Idaho.
There's something inherently wrong with the death penalty system as utilized in the Ninth Circuit and in every state, including Idaho, in the Ninth Circuit. There are a bunch of goofballs in California who simply are messing up the system to the point where it should just stop until things change with regard to that district.
With that said, 2 Idaho death row inmates have been executed in the last 10 years under the Ninth Circuit Court. Paul Ezra Rhodes was executed in 2011 after serving 24 years on death row, and Richard Levitt was executed in 2012 after serving 28 years on death row. Currently, Idaho has 8 inmates housed on death row, and the longest serving is Thomas Creech. The appeals process in the case of Thomas Creech has been going on for nearly 30 years, and according to Jim Harris, that appeals process can continue until the Ninth Circuit Court puts an end to it. As of November 3rd, 2019, no execution date has been set. Reporting in studio, McKenna King, 6 on your side.
Condition after a shooting in Boise had happened early Monday morning. Reports came in around midnight from the area around Arcadia and Palouse Street. This afternoon, Meridian police were called to a separate Meridian location, possibly tied to that overnight shooting. That's where Jessica Taylor is standing by live with the very latest.
Meridian and Boise police officers are on the scene of a stand-up possibly related to that deadly shooting Sunday night in Boise. Officers have been here for the past few hours, and as you can see behind me, it's still a fairly active scene. Police could not confirm if it was the shooter from Sunday night, but the vehicle matches the description of the one involved in the shooting.
So far, we have had 5 people exit the residence, some of which we do believe were involved in that shooting last night, as well as some people that we believe may just be witnesses.
We're not sure how many people are still inside, if any. Last we heard, SWAT was being sent to confirm if anyone else was inside. Areas of Ustick and Meridian Road have been closed since around 3 p.m. The Ada County coroner has confirmed that 19-year-old Beverly Martinez was the victim of Sunday night's shooting. 2 others remain in the hospital. Once the residence over here is cleared, officers are heading back inside with a search warrant to get a more in-depth sweep. Reporting live in Meridian, Jessica Taylor, 6 on your side.
6 on your side starts with this developing story.
Thanks for joining 6 on your side tonight. I'm Don Nelson. We begin tonight with a developing story out of Boise, a fire at a popular restaurant. 6 on your side's Anna Silver joins us live from the scene with the very latest.
Don, that's right. We are here at Los Mariachis. This is off the corner of Raymond and Fairview in Boise. I'm going to step out of the frame so you can take a look here. Now, I spoke with someone from the Boise Fire Department, and he tells me that there is so much damage in the roof of this building that they are actually not even working inside the building because they are afraid of it collapsing. So right now they are actually working on the outside. Several fire trucks, fire engines are here. Now the good news is he tells me that there was no one inside of the building at the time, and there are no injuries reported at the time. But he tells us that he doesn't know the cause of this fire just yet, and they're still working on it. There is still smoke coming out of that building. In Boise, Anna Silver, 6 on your side.